A pleasant day to each and everyone. Welcome to the online class for International Tourism and Culture. Again, my name is Professor Torres, who is the course facilitator for this class. For this presentation, I would like to give you an introduction about the tourism industry. I'll give you some statistics about tourist arrival and other important concepts that you have to understand as we start the learning about the tourism industry. Tourism is a major global industry. Tourism, as a part of the service sector, has become an important source of income for many regions and even for the entire country. Its contribution to economic development has encouraged countries to pursue this highly dynamic sector. According to the World Tourism Organization, or WTO, the number of international tourists has greatly increased from a mere 25 million in 1950 to 1,323 million in 2017. According to the data from the United Nations World Tourism Organization, my apologies as my data is a little outdated. This is the recent data that I can get for UNWTO in 2017. Anyway, international tourist arrivals numbered to 1,323 million, with an international tourism receipts of 1,225 billion in US dollars. If we will look at the different regions here in the world, we can see that the number one uh, region where the tourist arrival has a big number is in Europe, which has 671 million and a 450 billion US dollars tourism receipts. It was followed by the Asia and the Pacific, having 324 million visitors with 371 billion US dollars income. The third is America, that has 207 million tourist arrival with 313 US billion dollars of receipt. And the fourth is Africa, having 623 million tourist arrivals with 33 billion US dollars receipt. And last but not the least, or we can say an emerging destination or an emerging region, is the Middle East, having 58 million in tourist arrival and 58 billion US dollars in tourism receipts. So the world arrivals has a total of 1,323 million. If we will look at this graph, we can see here again whose region has the highest when it comes to uh, tourist arrivals by world region. We can see here that Asia and Pacific is top, followed by Middle East, and then followed by the Americas, and then the fourth one is Europe. And again, we can see that Africa is starting to grow. This data came from the United Nations World Tourism Organization. Looking at this graph, we can see that the increase in the number of tourism arrival is so surprising, with a 49 times increase in terms of tourist arrival, comparing it to the initial stage of tourism in 1950. Moving forward, its growth has been fueled by several factors, such as the development in transportation. We can see that in the early times, people would travel from one place to another only using animals as their transportation. And then now we have highly mechanized transportation. We can use air travel, we can use land, and we can have also traveling through the sea. Communication has also something that has also a big contribution in the industry. Like, for example, we can easily get connected with travel agency. We can book our ticket online. We can communicate uh, to transportation suppliers asking for their schedule. The opening up of barriers, like for example, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the the possible connection of the Silk Road connecting the different countries along that Silk Road, and the growing demand of people to travel. As the middle class continuously expand, there's also a demand for travel. It is not surprising then for tourism to be described as one of the most remarkable economic and social phenomena of the 21st century. Economic, because of course it has contributed to the economic income of the country. As a matter of fact, most countries would consider tourism as their number one industry. The social phenomena would mean the movement of people, people who are interested to travel, people who are interested to see activities, culture, and what's going on in different places. However, tourism remains to be a complex phenomenon that has been perceived at different perspectives by different sectors of the society. Complex phenomenon because, of course, even though we can see a lot of benefits for tourism, we can also, or we are also aware that it has disadvantages as well. So, in the next few days, we will be talking about the benefits and disadvantages of tourism. Different perspectives would mean the different voices that are within the tourism ecosystem, or perspectives coming from the different players of the industry, such as the tourist, the different businesses, the government, and probably travel intermediary. So, let's move on to the definition of what is tourism. Tourism has no universal definition until 1993, when the UNWTO came up with the recommendations on tourism statistics. These recommendations included a definition of tourism, the forms of tourism, and tourists, among other tourism statistics that could be used for statistical comparisons among countries. If you will look at the next slide, we can see some definition of tourism as defined by a dictionary, like it is a practice in commercial business of vacations and traveling around the world. It is also one of the fastest and growing industries. There are also books about principles of tourism that would give us a definition. Like, for example, tourism may be defined as the processes, activities, and outcomes arising from the relationships and the interactions among tourists, tourist suppliers, host governments, host communities, and surrounding environments that are involved in the attracting and hosting of visitors. It should be noted, however, that these were merely suggestions, and the WTO could not impose on every country to adopt these definitions. So, for UNWTO, tourism is defined as comprising of activities of persons traveling to and staying in places outside their usual environment for not more than one consecutive year for leisure, business, and other purposes. Let's look at this definition. Let's chunk it down and see how we will understand it from the definition given to us by UNWTO. Let's look at the comprising of activities. Comprising of activities would mean any activity of a person who have traveled. It can be business, it can be recreation, it can be meeting people for business purpose, it can be attending conference, it can be a social event. Any activity, as long as the person move or travel, then we can probably consider it as tourism. So tourism will not be complete without the people. This is the core or the life of the tourism industry. The people who are traveling. Traveling to, so definitely there is a place that they will go. They will be staying there in that place. When we say outside their usual environment, that would mean that it's not their place of residence, it's not their home. It should be another destination or another place. Now, the duration, how long? Not more than one consecutive year, meaning to say we can still consider it tourism if it's less than a year. Can be an overnight, it can be 2 days, it can be 3 days, it can be for a week or for a month, or even less than a year. What purpose? It can be leisure, can be business, and any other purposes. So I guess at this time, we can probably figure out what is this tourism is about. Um, so tourism uses the word travel. Okay, so travel is one word that is used interchangeably with tourism. Let me just give you a clarification or a line that divides between these two. However, not all travels are tourism. So, there is a need to differentiate travelers from visitors. Travelers are people on a trip between two or more places, meaning to say, for instance, I would like to go to Seoul and I'm on a trip, and then I can consider myself a traveler because I am here residing in Daegu, but will be going to Seoul for a personal reason, and so I can be considered a traveler. While visitors are people who are engaged in tourism. So, what engagement? What activities? The activities that we have already mentioned before. Now, to make it more clear, let's see the different terms that we usually interchange when we talk about the tourist in the tourism ecosystem. So we have here three terminologies that people would usually interchange when they talk about tourism. So first, we have the tourist. Okay. Tourist is a visitor who spends an overnight at the destination. So a tourist is a visitor who spends an overnight at the destination. This is a definition given to us by UNWTO 2014. While the traveler is someone who moves between different geographic locations for any purpose and any duration. While the visitor is a traveler taking a trip to a main destination outside his or her usual environment for less than a year for any main purpose other than to be employed by IRTS 2008. So if we will look at these three terms, we can say that the tourist can also be a visitor, while a traveler cannot be a tourist if its purpose is not about tourism related. Okay, so a little bit confusing for now, but as we go on, you will definitely understand what it is about. Visitors or tourists are different from other travelers because of the following three criteria. First, the trip should be a place other than their usual environment. So, when a tourist or a visitor would go to another destination, meaning to say they'll be traveling, um, they're considered visitor or tourist because they are not they're not going back to their place of residence, but they're in another destination for a certain reason. The stay in the place visited should not last more than 12 consecutive months. We have previously learned that tourism travel duration can be less than 12 months or less than a year. And the main purpose of the trip should be other than the exercise of activity remunerated from within the place visited. So people would be traveling or going to another destination for whatever leisure, business, or personal reasons they have. They can enjoy the place, they can look at the culture, but definitely they cannot be compensated or they cannot receive any form of compensation when they go to that certain destination. So that divides the line between the visitor or tourist and the traveler. Now, I would like to add at this point that travelers are travelers cannot be tourists, but tourists needs to travel for them to be considered tourist. Now, let's move on to the next slide for us to understand more the difference between the tourist and the traveler. As I've said, the traveler needs to move from a point of origin to a certain place for certain reasons. Tourist would needs to move also because tourism is a movement of people, but the reasons are very much different compared to the reasons why traveler moves. So here on your left, you will see here the different reasons why people like tourists or visitors would travel. First, let's look at business and or professional. Businessmen or professionals like doctors, engineers, lawyers would usually go to a destination like maybe to conduct business or maybe to have a business meeting or probably to I would say improve or maybe collaborate with some professionals, like, for example, doing a certain project or maybe presenting a conference. So, these people who are doing activities related to business and their professions can be considered tourists. Another classification of tourists are tourists who goes for a holiday. Holiday means during their vacations, like summer vacation for students, or maybe winter vacations, leisure activities such as playing golf, recreation can be a combination of, enjoying the sun, like at the beach, or maybe hiking, and whatever activities that will recreate, that will, recharge the person can also qualify as an activity. Another would be tourists who are visiting friends and relatives. When we visit friends, usually we would like to get in touch. We would like to, if they are having a wedding, to be part of the wedding celebration. And usually we see our relatives occasionally, like for example during Chuseok or maybe during Christmas, to get together with them or maybe to have a family reunion. Another reason why tourists would go to a place is um, to learn more. Okay, learn more would mean like students who are here for a short term, like maybe for one semester, because they would like to learn Korean language or maybe they would like to learn about the Korean culture. So they usually apply for an exchange program to learn their discipline and at the same time know about the culture. Or training can be skills training such as culinary or probably learning about the different kinds of wine or maybe learning about a craft. And another reason why people would go to a certain destination, tourists would go to a destination, would be for health. Like, for example, if I would like to, slim down, and I've heard that meditation or yoga will be very helpful for me to lose weight, then I might probably be enticed to go to a place wherein I can practice meditation and yoga. Or if, say, for example, in my home country, my medical needs cannot be attended due to, you know, the shortage of professional or maybe lack of a medical facility, then I might go to another country to avail of the medical care. Another purpose or any purpose that they would like to do. It can be a combination of any of the first few reasons that I have mentioned. It can be, you know, a practice of their faith, or probably something that will interest them um, to strengthen their spirituality. Like for example, for Muslims, it's a pilgrimage to Mecca. Maybe for the Buddhist, it can be somewhere in Thailand or India, or probably the Buddhist monks here in Korea that they're interested to see and maybe to avail of a temple stay. So they would go to such places. And a lot of people, I bet, they go to a certain country just to shop. Like, for example, in France, to buy some um, luxury items or signature items such as bags, such as cosmetics. And other people are tourists because they are, they have a short time. Like, for example, a short stopover, maybe a day or half a day, that would give them the opportunity to look around the places near the airport. And other reasons why would a tourist or a visitor would go to a certain destination. So here, the purpose is clear. They have a purpose for visiting the destination. While on the other side, the traveler side, if we look at this right side, the long list here on the right side, we can see that what is common here is they are workers. Workers such as border workers. Border worker are people who cross the border to do their work. For instance, Malaysian who works in Singapore and would commute every day from their country of residence, which is Malaysia, and would go to their workplace every day for work. Or probably those who are working in Macau. We all know that there's a lot of casino in Macau, and people would usually live outside Macau, like for example in Hong Kong, which is possible to travel because only of a 1 hour boat ride from either from Macau or from Hong Kong. We also have seasonal workers. When we say seasonal workers, mostly they are agricultural workers who helps in during the harvest season. So that's why we call them seasonal workers. Other short-term workers would be depending on the demand of the place, such as, for instance, maybe Japan during the Olympics would be hiring short-term workers to help them, you know, assist or probably facilitate the Olympics this coming August if it will push through. Then we also have long-term workers. Long-term workers, for example, the EPS workers here, the people working in factories or professionals such as us working here, and most often during breaks like winter or summer would go back to our home country. Then the travelers are also nomads and refugees. Who are these nomads? Nomads are people with no permanent place of residence. They would usually go from one place to another to, to temporarily squat or probably put up a shelter, harvest whatever is available within the area, and once there's nothing more to eat, they would move to another place. That's why they're called nomads. We also have refugees. Refugees are people who are coming from a certain country and would seek refuge, or yeah, would seek refuge uh, to another country. So probably you've heard about the Burmese people seeking refuge to other countries. Next, we have transit passengers not entering the economic and legal territory. Transit passengers meaning to say they're not interested to do any other activity, but they're just there for a stopover, waiting for their next, for their transit, for their transportation to go to their final destination. We also have crews on public modes of transport. Crews would mean the workers uh, in a transportation, like for example the flight attendants or people working in cruise ships. These are crews. And also we have people entering the country to establish their country of residence. So these are simply the immigrants. We also have long-term students who are studying maybe to get their degree from another country. We also have patients, and of course, when we have patients, most often their families are joining them to take care of the patient. And other travelers deemed not to enter the economic territory, meaning to say they are entering the destination, they are entering the place for reasons of work, like diplomats, consular staff, military personnel, and their families or dependents, and the armed forces, or yeah, the armed forces. So, do we understand the difference now between the tourist and the traveler? Again, I would like to make mention that tourism activity is not possible without the movement. So it means that all tourists are travelers, but not all travelers are tourists. So I hope I make things clear here when it comes to knowing the difference between a tourist and or a visitor. As I've said, tourists and visitors are words or terminologies that can be used interchangeably, while a traveler is different because a traveler's purpose is only to move from a point of origin to a point of destination for reasons other than tourism. Okay, so let's continue. Moving on to the next slide. Oh, let's skip this one. So this is just an activity that will test your knowledge on how well you learn about visitor, tourists, and travelers. Okay. The next slide is about the different types of visitors. So for tourism, we have this first two types of visitors. First is we have the overnight visitor and the same day visitor. So, overnight visitor, as I've said, or also tourist, is a visitor who spends his or her night away from home. As simple as maybe early morning you're here in Daegu and you know you're taking a flight from Daegu to Osaka and planning to go back here early morning the next day. So when you are in Japan, you're considered an overnight visitor. Or it can be also a same day visitor. A same day visitor, another term that we used for same day visitor is excursionist. Excursionist is a visitor who does not spend the night in a collective or private accommodation in the place visited. Meaning to say, the purpose can be tourism. However, that person will go back, okay, will go back to his residence and will only visit the destination for a day. So, for instance, I'm here in Daegu and is interested to, find a good Mexican restaurant in Seoul. So I will travel to Seoul, go to my favorite restaurant, eat, shop a little, and then go back here to Daegu. So in that case, I'm also a tourist in Seoul, or I can be considered an excursionist. So are we clear? Okay. Another type of visitors in a bigger perspective are visitors such as international and domestic. So from the term, we can understand that when we say visitor, an international visitor is any person who travels to a country outside his or her usual environment and other than the one in which he, she, his, her usual residence, but for less than 12 consecutive months, and whose main purpose is other than the exercise of activity remunerated from the place visited. In short, if I may give an example for international visitor, we know for a fact that a lot of students are working, right? They do some arobite for them to, enjoy their summer or their winter vacation to another country. So you're a Korean and you are going to Europe for maybe 3 weeks. You are considered an international visitor. International would mean from one country to another country. That's a simple explanation. An international visitor is somebody uh, entering another country for purposes of tourism. Then we have another type of visitor, the domestic visitor. As the name implies, domestic means within the country. So a person who travels to a place other than his or her usual environment, but still within his or her country of residence for less than 12 consecutive months and whose main purpose of trip is other than the exercise of an activity remunerated from within the place visited. Similar to the international visitor, but the geographic limit is within the country. Like probably, like for instance, I'm here in Daegu, and in summertime, I will be staying in Jeju for 2 weeks, and maybe another 2 weeks in Gwangwon-do. So I'm considered a domestic visitor. So I hope the domestic and international visitor, as well as overnight and same day visitor, are clear definitions for you.